There's a chapter in football history that almost nobody talks about. A country that helped create African football. A country that once conquered the entire continent with football. A country that produced one of the most influential leaders that the game has ever seen. Yet somehow, when people talk about football history, this country is almost never mentioned. How does a nation go from standing on top of Africa to becoming one of football's greatest forgotten stories? To answer that question, we have to travel back more than 60 years, because what happened next changed African football forever. Today, mention Ethiopia, and most people immediately think of marathon champions. Abebe Bikila, Haile Gebrselassie, Kenenisa Bekele, Terunesh Dibaba, Derartu Tulu, legends. But decades before Ethiopia became famous for running, there was another sport that captured the nation's imagination. Every weekend, thousands of people packed into stadiums. Children dreamed of wearing the national colors. Football wasn't just a popular sport. It was becoming a part of Ethiopia's identity, and the country was getting very good. In 1957, African football was still finding its identity. Only a handful of nations came together to create something completely new, the Confederation of African Football, CAF. One of those nations was Ethiopia. That wasn't luck, that wasn't coincidence. Ethiopia was helping build African football from the ground up. As the years passed, the national team became stronger, the crowds became louder, the expectations became bigger. Then, everything changed. Addis Ababa, the biggest match in Ethiopian football history. Thousands filled the stadium. Millions followed the result. Standing in Ethiopia's way, the defending African champions. Nobody expected what happened next. After an unforgettable battle, Ethiopia lifted the Africa Cup of Nations trophy for one incredible moment. The best football team in Africa was Ethiopia. And just when it seemed like the country was ready to take on the next step, one remarkable man entered the story. His name was Yidnekacho Tasamma. Most people have never heard of him, but if you love football, you should. He had already represented Ethiopia as a player. He helped coach African champions, but his biggest battles were fought on the pitch. They happened inside the boardrooms. Back then, African football wasn't treated equally. The rules weren't the same. The opportunities weren't the same. And Tasamma refused to accept that. For years, he challenged football's most powerful decision makers. He demanded respect. He demanded a future where African nations could compete with the rest of the world as equals. Little by little, things began to change. But while Tasamma was fighting for Africa, Ethiopia itself was fighting another battle, one that would determine whether its golden generation could achieve football's greatest dream, which is playing in the FIFA World Cup. Everything had been building towards this point. The champions of Africa, a nation overflowing with confidence, a football visionary leading the way, the entire country believed something historic was within reach, which is the World Cup. Supporters dreamed, players believed, the expectation was growing. Surely, this was Ethiopia's moment, but history doesn't always reward the best stories. Sometimes it writes heartbreaking stories. Here's the part that almost nobody knows. Despite helping found the CAF, despite becoming champions of Africa, despite producing one of the greatest football administrators in history, Ethiopia has never played in the FIFA World Cup. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack passion, but because in those days, the road to the World Cup was unlike anything we know today. African nations weren't guaranteed places. Even becoming champions wasn't enough. The dream that seemed so close always slipped away. And while Yidnekacho Tasamma spent years helping open the World Cup to the rest of Africa, the country he loved never managed to walk through that door. That is one of football's greatest ironies. Today, Ethiopia is still chasing that dream. Every qualifying campaign brings fresh hope. Every generation believes it might be the one. And maybe one day, the nation that helped build African football will finally take its place on football's biggest stage. When that happens, it won't simply be another World Cup qualification. It'll be the ending to a story that began nearly 70 years ago. And perhaps one of the biggest comebacks that football has ever seen. If you like this video, make sure you like, subscribe, and share. And let me know in the comments, do you think Ethiopia will qualify for the World Cup sometime within our lifetime?